The sun was setting over the quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek as a moving truck pulled up in front of a freshly painted blue house. The Thompson family stood together on the sidewalk, taking in their new surroundings with wide smiles and hopeful hearts. Mark Thompson, the father, leaned against his car, watching his wife Sarah direct the movers with calm efficiency. Their two children, Mia and Ethan, were already running around the yard, laughing as they explored every corner of their new home. Mark couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. After years of hard work, he had recently been promoted to police chief of Willow Creek, a role that came with responsibility, respect, and the chance to serve a community he cared deeply about. He knew this move would be good for his family. Away from the chaos of the city, Willow Creek seemed like the perfect place to raise kids and build memories. Sarah, too, felt optimistic. An artist by trade, she dreamed of opening her own studio someday, and this new town offered plenty of inspiration. She loved how peaceful it felt here. The tree-lined streets, the neat rows of houses, and the friendly faces peeking out of windows. "This is going to be great," she said, turning to Mark with a warm smile. "I can already picture us having barbecues out back." Mia, their teenage daughter, wasn't quite as convinced. At 14, starting over at a new school was daunting. She glanced at the neighboring houses, wondering if anyone her age lived nearby. Her little brother Ethan didn't share her worries. 9 years old and full of energy, he was busy chasing butterflies across the lawn. "Mom, Dad, can I get a dog now?" he shouted excitedly. As the movers unloaded boxes, Mark walked over to introduce himself to the neighbors. His first stop was the house directly next door, where an older woman named Mrs. Harper sat on her porch knitting. She greeted him warmly, offering congratulations on their move and promising to bring over some homemade cookies later. Encouraged by her kindness, Mark continued down the street, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with others. But not everyone shared Mrs. Harper's warmth. Across the street, a man named Mr. Grayson watched the scene unfold from behind his curtains. Narrowing his eyes, he frowned at the sight of the Thompsons unpacking. To him, their presence felt out of place in what he considered his neighborhood. He muttered under his breath, making assumptions based on appearances. Alone. Without even meeting them, he decided they didn't belong. By evening, the Thompsons had settled into their living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. They ordered pizza to celebrate their first night in the new house, laughter filling the air as they talked about their hopes for the future. Mark reassured his family that things would go smoothly. "We're going to love it here," he said confidently. Little did he know, challenges awaited just beyond their front door. For now, though, the Thompsons basked in the joy of a fresh start. Unaware of Mr. Grayson's simmering resentment, they focused on building a life in Willow Creek, a life they believed would bring happiness and connection. But sometimes, even the most beautiful beginnings come with unexpected storms lurking. Just around the corner the next morning, the Thompson family woke up early to begin unpacking and settling into their new home. The air was crisp, and the neighborhood seemed peaceful under the golden sunlight. Mark had already left for work, eager to get started in his new role as police chief, while Sarah decided to focus on arranging her art supplies in what would soon become her studio. Meanwhile, Mia and Ethan headed outside to explore the area further, hoping to meet some of the local kids. As they stepped onto the sidewalk, Mrs. Harper from across the street waved at them cheerfully. "Good morning," she called out, holding a plate of cookies wrapped in colorful foil. "I thought you might like these as a welcome gift." Sarah thanked her warmly, struck by how kind and welcoming she seemed. It gave her hope that Willow Creek could truly feel like home. While Sarah chatted with Mrs. Harper, Mia noticed a boy about her age riding his bike a few houses down. She hesitated for a moment before walking over to introduce herself. "Hi, I'm Mia," she said shyly. The boy looked up, surprised but friendly. "I'm Jake," he replied, offering a small smile. They exchanged a few words about school and hobbies before Jake promised to show her around later in the week. For the first time since moving, Mia felt a spark of excitement about making friends. Ethan, however, wasn't interested in meeting anyone just yet. Instead, he wandered toward the edge of the yard where a tall fence separated their property from the house across the street. That's when he saw him, a man standing near the window, watching them intently. Something about the way the man stared made Ethan uneasy. He quickly turned back toward the house, not wanting to linger. Back inside, Sarah finished organizing her paints and brushes, feeling optimistic about the day ahead. But her mood shifted when there was a sharp knock at the door. Opening it, she found herself face to face with Mr. Grayson, the neighbor whose frown had been evident the previous evening. His expression hadn't softened. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked politely, though her tone carried a hint of caution. Mr. Grayson cleared his throat, avoiding eye contact. "I wanted to let you know that this is a quiet neighborhood." He began stiffly. "We don't tolerate loud noises or disturbances here, just keep that in mind." Sarah blinked, taken aback by his abruptness. "Of course," she said slowly. "We'll be mindful of that. Thank you for letting us know." But as Mr. Grayson turned to leave, he muttered something under his breath, something Sarah couldn't quite catch but sensed wasn't meant kindly. She closed the door, feeling unsettled. Was he simply being protective of the neighborhood, or was there something more behind his words? Later that afternoon, Mia returned home after spending time with Jake, her spirits lifted by the prospect of friendship. But her happiness faded when Sarah told her about Mr. Grayson's visit. "He seemed really rude," Mia remarked, frowning. "Do you think we did something wrong?" "No, sweetie," Sarah reassured her. "Sometimes people take time to adjust to newcomers. Don't worry too much about it." That evening, Mark came home from work tired but satisfied with his first day as police chief. Over dinner, Sarah shared what had happened with Mr. Grayson. Mark listened quietly, concern flickering in his eyes. "Don't worry," he said firmly. "If he causes any trouble, we'll handle it together. We're not going to let anyone make us feel unwelcome." For now, life in Willow Creek still held promise. The Thompsons chose to focus on the positives: the warm welcome from Mrs. Harper, Mia's budding friendship with Jake, and the cozy atmosphere of their new home. Yet beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Mr. Grayson's disapproving gaze lingered in their minds, a reminder that not everyone in Willow Creek was ready to embrace change. And unbeknownst to the Thompsons, Mr. Grayson had already picked up his phone, dialing a number he thought might solve the problem once and for all. The following day started like any other in Willow Creek. Mark left early for work. Sarah busied herself setting up her art studio, and Mia spent the afternoon chatting with Jake about their shared love of music. Ethan played in the backyard, chasing butterflies and imagining himself as a superhero saving the world. For the Thompsons, life felt calm and hopeful, a stark contrast to the tension simmering just across the street. Mr. Grayson, however, was far from calm. His mind raced with frustration and resentment over the new neighbors. He couldn't shake the feeling that the Thompsons didn't belong in his neighborhood. To him, their presence disrupted the familiar rhythm of things. Determined to fix the situation, he sat at his kitchen table, scrolling through old contacts on his phone until he found the number he needed, the non-emergency line for the local police department. "This will teach them," Mr. Grayson muttered under his breath as he dialed the number. When the dispatcher answered, he cleared his throat and spoke in an exaggeratedly formal tone. "Yes, hello. I'd like to report suspicious activity at 42 Maple Lane." He described vague details, claiming he'd seen unfamiliar people moving, boxes late at night and acting strange. Without waiting for further questions, he hung up, satisfied with himself. At the police station, the call came through during a routine morning briefing. Officers exchanged puzzled glances. Maple Lane was one of the safest streets in town. Still, protocol required someone to check it out. As luck would have it, the task fell to none other than Chief Mark Thompson himself. Unaware of who had made the complaint, Mark grabbed his hat and headed toward his own house, curious about what might be going on. When Mark pulled into his driveway, he spotted a patrol car parked nearby. Confusion washed over him as he stepped out of his vehicle. Before he could ask what was happening, Officer Daniels approached him looking equally bewildered. "Chief, there's been a report of suspicious activity here," Daniels explained hesitantly. "But everything seems fine." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious activity? At my house? Daniels nodded awkwardly. That's what the caller claimed. They said they saw strangers behaving strangely. Mark sighed, shaking his head. Well, unless you count unpacking furniture as criminal behavior, I think we're good. He gestured toward the open garage where Sarah was sorting through boxes. She looked up, surprised to see her husband in uniform. What's going on? She asked, stepping outside. Mark filled her in quickly, trying to keep his tone light despite the absurdity of the situation. Sarah listened quietly, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding. It must have been Mr. Grayson, she said softly. Who else would do something like this? As if on cue, the curtain in Mr. Grayson's living room twitched slightly. Mark glanced over, spotting the man peeking out before quickly pulling back. A mix of anger and disbelief swirled inside him, but he forced himself to stay composed. This wasn't just personal, it was professional. If someone had a genuine concern, they should address it directly rather than making baseless accusations. Later that evening, Mark brought the issue up with Sarah after the kids were asleep. I don't want to escalate this, he said firmly. But we can't ignore it either. People like Grayson thrive on fear and division. We need to show him, and anyone else who thinks like him, that we're not intimidated. Sarah nodded, though worry lingered in her eyes. Do you think it'll stop here? Or is this just the beginning? Mark hesitated before answering. Only time will tell, but no matter what happens, we stick together. That's how we handle challenges as a family. Unbeknownst to them, Mr. Grayson watched the Thompson household from his window, fuming silently. His plan hadn't worked as intended, and now he felt more frustrated than ever. What he didn't realize was that his actions were only strengthening the resolve of the very family he sought to drive away. And deep down, beneath his resentment, a part of him wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. The days that followed were filled with an uneasy undercurrent for the Thompson family. While they tried to focus on settling into their new life, the shadow of Mr. Grayson's actions loomed over them. Mark had decided not to confront him directly, at least not yet. As police chief, he knew better than anyone how important it was to handle situations carefully and professionally. But even he couldn't deny the sting of being targeted by someone who hadn't given them a fair chance. Sarah, meanwhile, found herself growing increasingly anxious. She noticed Mr. Grayson watching their house more often now, his presence always lingering behind drawn curtains or at the edge of his yard whenever she stepped outside. It made her feel like they were living under a microscope, constantly judged and scrutinized. One afternoon, while hanging laundry in the backyard, she felt his gaze so intensely that she dropped a shirt onto the grass. Picking it up, she muttered under her breath, "Why can't he just leave us alone?" Mia and Ethan also began sensing the tension. Mia overheard her parents talking about Mr. Grayson late one night when she went downstairs for a glass of water. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but could tell it wasn't good. At school, she started feeling self-conscious, wondering if other kids might hear rumors about her family from their parents. Jake reassured her repeatedly that everything would be fine, but doubt lingered in her mind. Ethan, being younger, processed things differently. He invented elaborate stories in his head, imagining himself as a brave knight defending his castle, their home, against an invisible enemy, Mr. Grayson. One evening during dinner, he announced dramatically, "I'm going to build a moat around our house so no bad guys can get in." His declaration brought laughter to the table, momentarily easing the weight of their worries. Despite these small moments of levity, the situation grew more complicated. Word of the false police report spread quietly through the neighborhood. Some residents dismissed it as gossip, while others whispered among themselves, unsure what to believe. Mrs. Harper, however, took action. Concerned about the divide forming in Willow Creek, she invited Sarah over for tea one afternoon. "Don't let that man get to you," Mrs. Harper said firmly as they sat together in her cozy living room. "He's always been difficult, ever since we moved here years ago. But most people in this neighborhood are kind-hearted. Don't let one person define your experience here." Sarah appreciated the sentiment but couldn't shake the feeling that Mrs. Harper's words weren't enough to fix the problem. It's not just about us, she admitted softly. What happens when someone else moves in? Will they face the same thing? How do we stop this from happening again? Mrs. Harper nodded thoughtfully. That's where leadership comes in, she replied, glancing toward Mark's house. Your husband has an opportunity to set an example, not just as a neighbor, but as the police chief. People look up to him. If he handles this right, it could change things for everyone. Back at home, Mark wrestled with the same thoughts. He knew he couldn't ignore Mr. Grayson's behavior indefinitely, but he also didn't want to escalate the conflict unnecessarily. Instead, he focused on fostering goodwill within the community. Over the weekend, he organized a neighborhood barbecue at the local park, an event designed to bring people together. Flyers went up around town inviting everyone to attend. When the day arrived, the park buzzed with energy. Families gathered around picnic tables, children played tag on the grass, and the smell of grilled burgers filled the air. The Thompsons mingled freely, chatting with neighbors and sharing laughs. Even Mia relaxed, realizing that many of her peers were genuinely friendly. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park, Mark spotted Mr. Grayson standing near the edge of the crowd, arms crossed tightly over his chest. His expression was unreadable, but there was no mistaking the discomfort radiating from him. For a moment, Mark considered approaching him, to extend a hand, to offer understanding, but something held him back. This wasn't the time or place for confrontation. As the evening wound down, Mark couldn't help but wonder whether events like this would truly bridge the gap between neighbors, or if deeper issues lay beneath the surface, waiting to emerge. The neighborhood barbecue had been a success, at least on the surface. Families left with smiles and promises to meet again soon, and the Thompsons felt a renewed sense of hope. For the first time since moving to Willow Creek, they began to believe that their presence might actually bring people closer together. But beneath the cheerful facade, tensions simmered, and none more so than within Mr. Grayson himself. As he walked home from the park that evening, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, Mr. Grayson replayed the events of the day in his mind. He hadn't wanted to attend the barbecue, but curiosity got the better of him. What he saw only fueled his frustration. There was Mark Thompson, standing tall in his police uniform, shaking hands and laughing with neighbors as if he owned the place. And Sarah chatting animatedly with Mrs. Harper and other women, looking perfectly at ease. Even Mia and Ethan seemed to fit right in, playing games with other kids without a care in the world. They don't belong here, Mr. Grayson muttered under his breath, though the words felt hollow even to him. Deep down, he knew his anger wasn't just about the Thompsons. It was about change itself. Change made him uncomfortable, and he hated feeling out of control. Yet, for all his resentment, a small part of him couldn't ignore the warmth and camaraderie he'd witnessed at the park. It stirred something inside him, a memory of simpler times when he used to feel connected to the community too. Over the next few days, Mr. Grayson's behavior shifted slightly, though not enough for anyone else to notice. Instead of openly glaring at the Thompsons, he avoided them altogether, retreating further into his own world. But avoidance didn't make his feelings disappear. If anything, it gave them room to grow, festering like an untreated wound. One afternoon, while pruning his roses in the front yard, Mr. Grayson overheard laughter coming from the Thompsons' backyard. Curiosity got the better of him once again, and he found himself peeking through the fence. What he saw surprised him. Mark was sitting on a folding chair, teaching Ethan how to toss a baseball. Nearby, Sarah sat on a blanket, painting a vibrant picture of the garden while Mia played her guitar softly in the background. The scene was peaceful, almost idyllic. For a moment, Mr. Grayson forgot why he disliked them. They looked happy, normal, not the invaders or troublemakers he'd imagined them to be. But then his pride kicked in, reminding him of all the reasons he believed they didn't belong. Shaking his head, he turned away, muttering, "It doesn't matter. This isn't right." That evening, unable to shake off what he'd seen, Mr. Grayson decided to take a walk, a rare occurrence for him. As he strolled down the quiet streets, he passed by Mrs. Harper's house. She was watering her flowers and greeted him warmly. "Evening, Mr. Grayson. Lovely weather we're having, isn't it?" He grunted in response, but she didn't seem deterred. "You should come by for tea sometime," she added casually. "It's been ages since we caught up." Mr. Grayson hesitated, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to kindness from others. Not anymore. Over the years, his standoffish nature had driven people away, leaving him isolated. Part of him longed for connection, yet another part resisted it fiercely. In the end, he mumbled something non-committal and hurried on. Back at home, he poured himself a cup of tea and sat by the window, staring out at the Thompsons' house. His thoughts were jumbled, conflicting emotions warring within him. On one hand, he still clung to his belief that they didn't belong. On the other, he couldn't deny the nagging voice in his head telling him he might be wrong. Meanwhile, life went on as usual for the Thompsons. Unaware of Mr. Grayson's internal struggle, they continued building connections with their neighbors. Mia joined Jake and his friends for a movie night. Ethan proudly showed off his new Lego creations to Mrs. Harper, and Sarah started hosting weekly art sessions in her studio. Slowly but surely, the family became woven into the fabric of Willow Creek. But Mr. Grayson remained an outlier, a man torn between his prejudices and the faint glimmer of doubt creeping into his heart. Would he choose to hold on to his bitterness, or would he find the courage to let go? Only time would tell. The following week brought an unexpected twist to the quiet rhythm of Willow Creek. A storm rolled in overnight, drenching the town with heavy rain and strong winds. By morning, tree branches littered the streets. Power lines sagged dangerously low, and several homes, including Mr. Grayson's, had suffered minor damage. The Thompsons woke up to find their backyard fence partially collapsed, likely due to a fallen branch. Mark immediately sprang into action. As police chief, he knew emergencies like this required leadership and teamwork. He coordinated with local authorities to ensure everyone's safety, directing officers to check on vulnerable residents and clear debris from roads. But his responsibilities didn't stop there. Once his official duties were handled, he grabbed work gloves and joined volunteers helping neighbors repair their properties. When Mark arrived at Mr. Grayson's house later that day, he found the older man standing in his driveway, staring at a broken gutter hanging precariously off the roof. For a moment, neither spoke. Mr. Grayson looked surprised and perhaps even embarrassed to see Mark there. "What are you doing here?" he asked gruffly, crossing his arms. "I'm here to help," Mark replied simply, holding up his tools. "Looks like you've got some damage that needs fixing." Mr. Grayson hesitated, clearly torn between pride and practicality. Finally, he muttered, "Fine, but I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Mark said firmly. "It's what neighbors do." For the next hour, the two men worked side by side, repairing the gutter and clearing away broken branches. At first, their conversation was stilted, limited to short instructions about where to place the ladder or how to secure the nails. But as they labored together under the gray sky, something shifted. Slowly, tentatively, they began talking, not about the weather or the storm, but about life. Mark shared stories about growing up in a small town similar to Willow Creek, explaining how much he valued community and connection. To his surprise, Mr. Grayson opened up too, though reluctantly. He talked about losing his wife years ago and how lonely it had been since. "This neighborhood used to feel like home," he admitted quietly. "But lately, everything feels different." Mark listened without judgment, nodding thoughtfully. "Change can be hard," he said, "but it doesn't have to mean losing what matters. Sometimes it just means making space for new things." By the time they finished the repairs, the tension between them had softened, if only slightly. Mr. Grayson still carried traces of his old resentment, but there was a flicker of something else now, a glimmer of understanding, however fragile. That evening, Sarah noticed a change in the air when she stepped outside to water her plants. Mr. Grayson was tending to his roses again, but this time, he glanced over and gave her a brief nod. It wasn't exactly friendly, but it wasn't hostile either. She smiled faintly in return, sensing that progress, no matter how small, was underway. Inside the Thompson household, the family gathered around the dinner table, reflecting on the day's events. "Did you really go help Mr. Grayson?" Mia asked, raising an eyebrow. "After everything he's done?" "Yes," Mark replied evenly. "Because that's what we're supposed to do. Holding on to anger only makes things worse for everyone." Sarah nodded in agreement. "Maybe this is the start of something better," she said hopefully. "He might not change overnight, but every step counts." As the night settled over Willow Creek, the town felt a little brighter despite the lingering clouds. The storm had caused chaos, but it had also created opportunities for healing, for understanding, and perhaps even for forgiveness. And while challenges undoubtedly remained, one thing was certain: the Thompsons weren't going anywhere. They were planting roots in Willow Creek, determined to nurture a sense of unity that could withstand any storm. Weeks passed, and the storm that had battered Willow Creek seemed to leave behind more than just repaired fences and cleared streets. Slowly but surely, a subtle shift began to take root in the neighborhood, and no one noticed it more than Mr. Grayson himself. His interactions with the Thompsons remained cautious, but they were no longer hostile. He still kept to himself most days, tending to his roses or reading by the window, but there was a newfound softness in his demeanor. One crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves swirled through the air, Sarah decided to host a small gathering at her newly finished art studio. She'd invited several neighbors, including Mrs. Harper and Jake's family, to celebrate the space where she hoped to inspire creativity and connection. To her surprise and slight nervousness, Mr. Grayson accepted the invitation when she extended it to him during one of their brief exchanges over the fence. On the day of the event, the studio buzzed with energy. Colorful paintings adorned the walls, and easels were set up for guests to try their hand at painting. The scent of freshly baked cookies filled the room, courtesy of Mrs. Harper, while soft music played in the background. Mia helped serve snacks, chatting animatedly with Jake and other kids, while Ethan proudly showed off his latest Lego creation to anyone who would listen. When Mr. Grayson arrived, he stood awkwardly near the doorway, clutching a potted plant he'd brought as a gift. "I wasn't sure what to bring," he admitted gruffly to Sarah. "So I thought, well, plants seem appropriate." Sarah smiled warmly, touched by the gesture. "It's perfect, thank you. Why don't you come in and see the studio?" As he wandered through the space, Mr. Grayson found himself drawn to a painting in the corner, a vibrant depiction of Willow Creek under a sunset sky. "Did you paint this?" he asked, turning to Sarah. "Yes," she replied, surprised by his interest. "It's my favorite view of the neighborhood." He studied it silently for a moment before nodding. "It's nice," he said finally, his tone softer than usual. "You've got talent." The compliment caught Sarah off guard, and she thanked him sincerely. For the rest of the afternoon, Mr. Grayson stayed on the edges of the crowd, observing rather than participating. But even that felt like progress. When Mark approached him later offering a friendly handshake, Mr. Grayson didn't pull away. Instead, he muttered, "Thanks for inviting me." "It's good to have you here," Mark replied simply, meeting his gaze without judgment. By the end of the evening, as the last guests trickled out, Sarah reflected on how far things had come since their rocky start. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. Old habits and prejudices die hard. But there was hope now. Hope that understanding could replace fear, and kindness could bridge divides. A few days later, Mark received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Mr. Grayson, written in neat but shaky handwriting. In it, he apologized, not outright, but enough to show remorse for his earlier behavior. "I realize now that I judged too quickly," the note read. "Your family has done nothing but contribute to this community. Thank you for showing patience." Mark folded the letter carefully, feeling a swell of gratitude. This wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about growth for both Mr. Grayson and the entire neighborhood. That weekend, the Thompsons hosted another barbecue, this time specifically inviting Mr. Grayson to join them. Though hesitant at first, he eventually agreed. As he sat among the laughter and chatter, sipping lemonade and watching Ethan chase butterflies across the yard. A sense of peace washed over him. Maybe change wasn't so bad after all. And so, life in Willow Creek continued, not without its challenges, but with a renewed spirit of unity. The Thompsons had proven that even the strongest walls can crumble when met with compassion and perseverance. Together they were building not just a home but a brighter future for everyone.